1. For a bit of context, I'm female and 20. I have a twin brother, Adam. This story took place in the summer of 2019. Both my brother and I had racked up some cash by working in retail, tutoring, and the like. While still going to school, of course, Adam and I decided on a last-minute trip to Central Europe in the middle of July. We booked our flights, hotels, and were planning on exploring the city spontaneously. Our trip was set to start during mid-July, and the flight back was a week later. We were beyond stoked to finally have a nice holiday during the summer. We said our goodbyes to our parents as they dropped us off at the airport. Our first destination was Budapest, Hungary, and upon our arrival I noticed that everyone was groggy, including myself, as it was a lengthy flight. Adam and I claimed our luggage and headed to the exit of the airport. Adam had initially organized with a car service to provide us with a ride to our hotel. We got into the car, and it was a short drive to where we were staying. We thanked the driver and entered the decent-looking hotel. We dropped off our belongings in our room, then decided on getting a bite to eat since we were starving. Adam fumbled on his phone with Google Maps to search for the nearest shopping mall, since it would have a variety of food options. My brother and I stood outside our hotel waiting for a taxi to pass by. I impatiently tapped my foot on the sidewalk. A traditional-looking taxi pulled up in front of us. The car appeared as if it had been through hell and back. Red flag. Right then an unsettling feeling brewed inside me. He rolled down the window and with a blank expression voiced, "Taxi." My brother responded with a nod and grabbed the door handle to the front seat. I followed suit and started to get into the car. The interior of the taxi was filthy and full of junk. I brushed it off as the driver being lazy and disorganized and sat in the back seat behind him. Right off the bat I could tell something was off with the man. I mentally punched myself in the face for having gotten into the car with a potential threat. I don't know, it was the vibe he gave off. It just didn't feel right. Adam in his nature initiated small talk with the driver, completely oblivious to the glances the driver shot me through the rearview mirror. His eyes ignited with hate and disgust, and fear immediately engulfed me. Soon we came to a stoplight, then the unthinkable. My worst nightmare was about to come true. The driver pressed down on the gas pedal full speed. We were practically flying down the road. He started yelling what sounded like slurs or cursing in a foreign language, most likely Hungarian. He was zooming down the street and screaming like a madman, grabbing Adam by the shirt collar, while my brother tried to fight him off, telling him to stop. I started to panic, and I was in full fight-or-flight mode, so I tried rolling down my window to scream for my fucking life, but unfortunately it was locked. I promise I tried the window button and the door handle numerous times, but to no avail. I tried to keep as quiet as possible in the back seat. In my head I was just praying to God this damn car would stop, that the man would change his course of actions before some tragedy befalls us. The driver, in the same angry manner, accelerated, targeting a black SUV. Our car was so close to the SUV that we were merely inches away. I was mentally preparing myself that my brother and I were gonna die as soon as we crashed. Then, by some miracle, the other driver at the last millisecond swerved off the railway, hitting the brakes hard, all while honking on his car horn. Our driver then started laughing in an insane and disturbing fashion, sending chills down my spine. The laughter was getting louder and more sinister, filling the car now. At this stage I was downright pissing myself, thinking how my life was going to be over because of some psychopath. Tears started rolling down my face, and I tried as hard as I can not to show it, holding my breath to not make a sound. The man kept speeding down the road, his yelling growing louder. I closed my eyes as hard as I could, not wanting to see what would happen next. It was so surreal it all felt like a dream. Adam kept begging the driver to knock it off. His voice was shaky as he kept pleading in a desperate attempt. "Please drop us off here. Here is fine, please." I could tell from my brother's tone that he tried remaining civil as he didn't want to piss the driver off any further. The driver once again was yelling, but then his vehicle finally came to a stop. A feeling of relief washed over me as I didn't feel myself flying in an accelerating car any longer. I finally had the courage to open my eyes. I pulled on the door handle, and I stepped out of the car, feeling as if I had just escaped hell on earth. I looked up to see that the taxi had dropped us off at a gas station. The driver demanded $50 in cash, which my brother gladly handed him, while a singular tear ran down his cheek. Adam and myself were still in a state of aftershock, as we tried to find anyone to ask for directions to the nearest restaurant. We spent the rest of the way on foot. We were silent, not being able to express our feelings in words. My heart was beating violently and rapidly to make up for the words I couldn't form. I was still trying to comprehend the events that had just unfolded. We went home that night shattered and mortified from an unexpected first day in Budapest. I fell asleep at around midnight, but my brother told me the next morning that he wasn't able to sleep a wink. We continued our journey through the city, mostly on foot, avoiding taxis for the most part. I don't know what the driver's plan was or what his intentions were, but I'm glad to have escaped out of that situation with my brother and I both alive. Thankfully, neither of us were harmed, and I'm grateful to still be alive to tell you this story today. I believe Adam and I were extremely lucky to have gotten out of that taxi in one piece. Always follow your instinct, and if you see any red flags from the get-go, do not take the chance. And to the taxi driver in Budapest, let's not meet again. 2. During 2015, I moved to New York City with my family from Chile, and my then boyfriend came over to visit me. We were both 18 years old at the time, and our first language is Spanish. We had basically made it our goal to visit most of NYC, including non-touristy places, off-the-beaten-path places and stuff. So one day, we decided to go through the only borough we've not been to, Staten Island. We cross over on the ferry and hop on the bus to South Beach at around noon or so. We spend the whole afternoon on the beach chatting, taking pictures and such, and walking along the beach in the direction of the ferry terminal. As it starts to get dark, my mum calls me and tells me to come home soon because she's getting worried. So, slightly pissed at the fun being over, we decide to wait for a bus, because we thought it would take less time than walking. We waited for a really long time until finally one came up and we took it. By this point, it was already dark, but the bus seemed alright to me. Normal people going on it about their business. We were sitting at the front, behind the driver on a row of seats, and I'm just on my phone looking at Google Maps so as not to miss our stop. My boyfriend is talking in Spanish, when suddenly he says in hushed tones that something is off, that he's got a weird feeling about the bus. He's got my full attention now because he's not someone to have an intuition or anything of the sort. So he tells me to look at the man in front of us and that he's holding a flip phone. At this point I'm really confused because I don't see the problem. So I look up, trying not to make it obvious we were talking about him, and I see the dude in front of me. He was looking straight back at me. He was sitting with his legs wide open on the opposite row, fiddling with the flip phone between his legs, staring at me, with a really creepy smile on his face. It was as if he knew we were talking about him and I was gonna look up. He knew we were scared. My boyfriend very quietly and in Spanish says to me that the dude has been texting back and forth on his phone, constantly exchanging looks with another dude on the back of the bus, who is also on his phone texting. He says it's weird that someone in this day and age has a flip phone, and that it looks like a phone you'd have to throw away later. So I say to him, "Do you think he wants to steal my phone?" Which was a shitty $50 LG, but was the only thing of value on us at the time. We weren't carrying any bags, expensive clothes, nothing. Just jeans, hoodies, and my phone. My boyfriend didn't even have his on him because he didn't have data in America. He responds, "No, that's not what he wants. He's been staring at you the whole time, texting and exchanging glances with the man at the back, and he's looking at me smirking. He knows I know he's looking at you. Also, look at that guy sitting to your right. He was sitting in the back next to the second dude, and he changed seats a few minutes ago. And he's right next to you now." At this point, I've been staring at the ground while he hushes all of this, and I look up ever so slightly, and to my surprise, there is a third dude sitting right next to me. I was on the end of a row of seats, and he was sitting on the first pair of seats that are perpendicular to the row. I was looking at all three dudes, and each time I make eye contact with them, as if they had been expecting, or at the very least were minding what I was doing. He tells me all three men have been exchanging glances. The one sitting perpendicular to me just switched seats from the back to be closer, and the guy in front of us seems the most intimidating, because he keeps smirking and seems to be the one planning, or whatever. I agree he's got a sort of alpha attitude, if you will. Anyway, we sit uncomfortably for about half a minute, thinking something is about to go down. The atmosphere was so tense. I could feel their eyes piercing through me. By this point it was clear all three of them were in on it, but it was already dark out, buses were clearly not very frequent, and we were scared to get off and have them follow behind. So we reach a stop, where one of the few other people on the bus, an older lady with a little shopping cart, rings a bell and starts getting up from her seat. We then decide to stay really still and just run off the bus when she steps off. We did exactly that. Remained in our seats as the lady was hopping off the bus, one foot off, and the other is still on. And we just literally ran and got off the bus as the doors were closing. We waited for the next bus, which had more people on and obviously didn't feel that same weird energy, and got to the terminal to take the ferry back to Manhattan. Always looking back over our shoulders, of course. Got home, told my parents about it. My dad went white as a sheet and told me to never go back to Staten Island, even though he's not one to worry much. My mom, on the other hand, nearly threw a fit. She said she'd had a bad feeling and just wanted me to come home, and that was why she'd called me. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't gotten off the bus right then and there. I had never felt such relief as when I got off. It's really scary to think about, but I genuinely think, my boyfriend agreed, that because of the way they stared at me and looked at him, sort of like mocking him, it was probably something much more serious than a robbery. 3. A little backstory. I had just finished high school and had recently turned 18 when all of this occurred. I was looking forward to starting university, and was going to be moving out of my parents' house into student housing closer to the campus. As a result, I started looking for a job closer to my residence. I found one about 5 minutes' walk from where I was going to be living, and it was perfect for me. I was to be a barista in a tiny little coffee kiosk on one of the coolest streets in the city. This street was sort of known for prostitution and drugs, but it was also super popular as it hosted some of the most interesting events, and also contained some of the nicest thrift stores in the city. What was even more ideal about my new job was the fact that I worked right across the road from my best friend, Phoebe. At the time, Phoebe was in love with her job. She was actively being given more responsibilities, and she was being promised the world by her employers. Many of these promises turned out to be false at the time, but that is another story. During one of her shifts, Phoebe was approached by a man who had seemingly become a regular at the place that she was working, Richard. He told her that if she ever wanted to leave her job, he had just become the manager of a new restaurant a little ways down the road. Phoebe kindly denied his offer. He approached her several more times with this same offer before she recommended him our other close friend, Mia. Mia was hesitant to take the position at first because she has a passionate hatred for hospitality and greatly prefers retail, but she needed the extra money at the time and she took the job. The day that Mia was signing her contract, Phoebe and I both finished work early, around 4, so we told Mia that we would meet her at her new job once we finished, and then we would do something after. Phoebe and I went to the cake shop next door and sat outside her work while we waited for Mia. When they finished, Richard followed Mia outside to come say hi to Phoebe. The girls introduced him to me, and conversation ensued. He seemed like a friendly guy, if not a little bit awkward. He was late 30s, early 40s, bird-like in appearance, quite short, balding, larger in size, and seemed very greasy. As the conversation continued, I began to tease Mia a little bit as friends do. I saw no harm in it, as she was one of my best friends, and she had made a similar joke at my expense prior to this interaction. Richard's demeanor suddenly seemed to switch. He became somewhat catty in defense of Mia. He retorted back that if I was going to be mean to his staff, that he would bar me from every store on the street we worked on. This seemed ridiculous, but he claimed to be friends with the security guard that worked on the street. I actually was friends with this man, and when I asked him about it, he told me he had never heard of Richard before. Richard said these things to me as though he was joking, but he was so persistent about it that I got incredibly uncomfortable and wanted to cry. It was from this interaction that he named me Trouble. I also feel it needs to be noted that he didn't scold Mia or Phoebe at all for the same behavior. Phoebe sensed my discomfort and told him that we had to leave as we had plans. Flash forward a few weeks and Phoebe and I decide to go see Mia at work again. Richard intrudes on our conversation yet again, and again he singles me out from the group, teasing me and only referring to me as Trouble. This time I just play along, as I can tell it isn't going to stop. He asks Mia if she's after another job, as he needs someone to clean his home, and lives all the way out where my parents and Mia live. Mia tells him she can't as she has too many responsibilities, but I tell him I might know a few people in the area that might do it, and I give him my phone number. Richard takes this as a sign that I have agreed to do it, and begins texting me incessantly about setting up a meeting. This man is much older than me and lives alone in a rural area. Suddenly my instincts kick in, and I try to get out of it by telling him I can't drive. He says he can pick me up from the nearest train station. I don't want to come across as impolite or have my best friend's boss resent her because of me, so I make the mistake of agreeing. However, I tell him that my sister will be helping me as she is looking for a part-time job, and my dad will be dropping me off. I do this in order to have some backup, and so that my dad knows my whereabouts. Richard goes on to complain about how I don't trust him and claims that his house is very small, and the $100 he is going to pay me won't be enough to split with my sister. I tell him that I just want to provide her with work experience, and he finally agrees, asking how old she is. My sister is 17. Richard and I finally find a time that I am not working to schedule a meeting. This meeting is held at his place of work, and I feel a lot more comfortable sitting in the main restaurant, surrounded by people, as I thought he was going to hold this meeting in an office. We begin talking about the responsibilities of the job. He tells me it'll be basic things like tidying up, vacuuming, the usual. I agree. He then goes on to tell me he will also be expecting me to do his laundry. I think this is a bit odd, as he is only paying a small amount for such a large job. He assures me that his house is small and not that messy, but continuously claims it just needs a woman's touch. I nod and ignore the fact that this grown man thinks that just because he is a man, it means he doesn't need to know how to maintain his own home. Now this is where things start to get creepy. Near the end of the meeting, he asks me again how old my sister is, and when I say 17, his face drops. He then starts telling me about how he previously posted this ad on Craigslist, and a 60-year-old woman replied offering to do it in her lingerie. He tells me how he didn't even ask for that in the ad, but she offered and he was put off completely. He then proceeds to tell me that he would be willing to pay more to someone between the ages of 18 to 30, if they were willing to do that, but he would never request that because he's not a pervert. I call bull at this and tell him then and there that the meeting is over, and I have to go meet Phoebe. He asks me if he made me uncomfortable. Fuck yes, you did. But I just say no, and that I'll get back to him. This strange man, who I have only met 3 times, then attempts to hug me, but I ignore the gesture and awkwardly wave goodbye from less than 3 feet away. I busted down the street to Phoebe's work and tell her the whole story. She tells me I can't do it, and I tell her I know, but I don't know how to tell him that without risking my own safety or Mia's job. Fortunately, Richard gives me the perfect out. He texts me later that afternoon telling me he hopes I'm okay with cats because he has a small one. I see this as the perfect opportunity to lie and tell him my sister and I are both deathly allergic to cats, and neither of us will be open to doing the job. Richard accepts this reasoning after a little persuasion, and I think I'm finally done with him. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Richard proceeded to text me every day, asking if I'm mad at him or if he made me uncomfortable. Asking about how my day was, etc. Just behaving like a preteen in a new relationship, basically. And the more I ignored him, the more he texted. I finally blocked him in March of 2019. This escapade had began 4 or 5 months prior to this. The blocking still didn't stop him, though. Mia informed me that Richard was no longer going to be working there, as he had to go for surgery, and we wouldn't have to see him anymore. See, Richard hadn't only been harassing me, but Mia and Phoebe too, just to a lesser extent. One Saturday morning while I was working, setting up at around 7:45 a.m., Richard showed up at my work. The divider was down as we were closed, so he came and stood in the doorway, the only exit I had available to me at the time. He started asking me why I was ignoring him and telling me about his surgery. I told him he wasn't allowed to stand there as it was a fire exit, but he didn't budge. Fortunately, my boss showed up shortly after and told Richard he was going to phone security if he didn't move, recognizing the sheer look of fear on my face. My boss was kind of an ass on most days, but holy shit was I grateful for him that morning. Roughly a month after that experience, I thought Richard was gone from my life. I was living in my new apartment. Mia was around all the time and loved her job without Richard there. Things were going well for us. One morning, after a night of drinking, me and the flatmates became peckish. I decided to order us some greasy food on a food delivery app. Lo and behold, who is our delivery driver other than Richard? I turn to my boyfriend at the time and tell him he has to go collect the food. He doesn't understand, but Mia assures him it's important. He agrees and goes out to collect it. Richard is not driving the vehicle he claims to be driving on the app, and at first we're confused, as the number plate is also different. Mia and I watch from his bedroom window, and the interaction takes much longer than expected. He comes back and we ask him what took him so long. He tells us that Richard refused to give him the food until he could prove that he was my boyfriend. He recognized my name from the app, and now he knew where we lived. Mia and I tell my flatmates the story of what happened, and we all agree it's a good idea to go to my RA. The RA reports it to upper management, and they say they can't really do anything about it, but if he comes again, to call their security. A few months go by and there are no Richard sightings until I order from the same app again. Yet again, Richard is our driver, yet again in a different car. I send my boyfriend to go collect the food again, and report the incident to my RA again, and the food delivery app. I know I was stupid in not immediately reporting it to campus security, as I had much more proof of the creepy behavior than he had of his innocence. But I was naive, and I didn't want my parents to find out at the time. Fortunately, I haven't seen Richard since then, and for future reference, let's not meet ever again, for your sake. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 482. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Yeah, you know, regarding story number 2 there, it's a silly thing to get stuck in my head. I know it's a silly thing, but I can't help but every time I hear Staten Island thinking of the show What We Do in the Shadows, because that's where it takes place. If you've seen the film, there's also a TV show based on it, if you didn't happen to know that. And it's just as good. Absolutely hilarious. They've got a truly fantastic cast in there. Everyone just fits into the roles so well. Even the character of Colin Robinson, who I thought was really going to irritate me. Absolutely hilarious, he really is. I've been watching it a lot recently. It's up on the BBC iPlayer. I've actually been looking to see if I could buy it, but I can't seem to get, I can only seem to find an import right now. So I'm on the lookout to find it for a reasonable price. Although I did get a good price deal on the Doom Patrol the other day there. So I've got that coming through the mail. It'll be a while because it's coming from Amazon US, but still pretty cool. I'm rambling again. I've lost track of what I was saying. Well. Talk about TV shows, I suppose. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.